They're asking questions all day long, anywhere from a few handfuls to a few dozen, in some cases, hundreds of times a week, hundreds of times a month. They're asking questions on search engines. They're asking questions on Copilot, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, Siri. Like they're just asking questions like crazy. So from your standpoint, if we want to be able to attract the right people and the right companies, we have to know what those questions are and exactly what the questions are in their own words. And we need to map those to who our most important buyer persona is and start there by making sure that when someone goes and asks one of those questions, because more than likely you are getting questions by email, you're getting questions by phone, you're getting questions on your lead generation forms, you're getting questions when you have face-to-face meetings and video meetings. All of these give you unique insight into what they care about.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. A little while back, we held a webinar called Data Center Lead Generation 101. At the end of that webinar, we opened it up for an informal Q&A question and answer session based on the questions that were submitted ahead of time before the webinar, as well as submitted during the webinar. Let's listen in so you can learn more about data center lead generation.
And with that, as promised earlier, we're now going to shift over into our Q&A session for today. I'm going to start by answering the questions that were sent in ahead of time that were raised when we asked you what your biggest sales and marketing challenges are. And I'll also try to answer as many questions as possible that are in the chat pane and in the question and answer feature in Zoom. So first question up is, how do we find the right leads? How do we generate more quality leads? So how do we find the right leads and generate more quality leads? That's a fantastic question. And it really depends on the nature of who you want to be generating these leads from. So the first place to start is, as long as you have an established business, you probably have a pretty good idea of what kinds of clients you've been most successful with. And this will show up in a couple of different places. The most basic place is you likely have a case study section on your website. So from that case study section, you should be able to find the commonalities across where you've been most successful and back into documenting an ideal client profile. This will indicate where your best clients are located geographically, what size those companies are, and any parameters around like business model or industry that they all tend to fall into. And again, this is where they've been the happiest, where they've onboarded the most successfully, where they've had the best customer success account management experience, where your customer marketing, your expansion, all that stuff has been most successful. And they've been case study worthy. So that helps you to find at a company level who you want more of, right? So geographically, it might be part of a state or a province, a whole state or province, several several countries, a continent, globally, whatever is relevant to your business. Size-wise, it depends on the nature of your business models. A lot of people in the data center industry focus on power needs and focus on square footage. If you're going to use LinkedIn, kind of the gold standard for professional B2B lead generation, at some point you're going to have to normalize that data for headcount or number of employees, because LinkedIn Campaign Manager, regular LinkedIn, and LinkedIn Sales Navigator are all based on the same bands, the same parameters for employees, like 1 to 10, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, on up. So that should be in your ideal client profile. And anything that's unique about their business models or their industry, their verticals, that align especially well with what you do. Because we know that when you take the intersection of certain industries and certain geographic locations, a lot of regulatory issues come up. So is your product and service, is your team expert in being able to deliver the best results for that kind of business and that kind of location? Yes or no? That'll determine what you do with your ideal client profile. From your ideal client profile, you should be able to build out a target account list. It could be anywhere from a few dozen, usually a couple of hundred, in some cases, several thousand companies that fit that ideal client profile that you would love to be able to do business with in the coming weeks, months, and years. And that becomes the basis of what you're going to do with a lot of your promotional plan once you've developed great lead generation offers, getting those offers in front of the right companies, and now who are the right people in the right companies. Those are your buyer personas. So when we look at, first we define your company and document it in an ideal client profile. Next, we need to define who are the kinds of people that we need to be building relationships with in these kinds of companies? Who do we need to be generating leads with? These are your buyer persona. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client that you would love to have based on some select education, some select speculation and actual research. That speculation from your internal stakeholders should be no more than 20-25% of your customer insight research. Most of your customer insight research that goes into your buyer personas needs to come from external research, either face-to-face interviews, video interviews, surveys, questionnaires, or just at the absolute minimum, studying their LinkedIn profiles, how they describe themselves, the kind of content they share, and what shows up when you do simple Google searches about that particular person. Like, can you see journals and articles that they've been quoted in, news releases? Can you see conferences, recordings of conferences they've spoken at, webinars, podcasts? Like, so you can understand what's really top of mind. What are their biggest goals? What are their biggest challenges? And what do they need the most help with? Once you have that figured out and documented, you'll want to prioritize what's your most important buyer persona, your second most important buyer persona. You'll have a primary and a secondary buyer persona. And for those of you that sell to decision committees, where there's really no, everyone always says, I need to get to the decision maker. And yeah, in most cases, there actually is a person who has the final say for the sign off. But the reality is there's almost always now a decision committee as well. So even if you matter, even if you manage to get the attention of the CTO or CFO or ESG or whoever is the magic person for your particular sales process, they're almost certainly going to send it back to their team. So that's the decision committee, and that's where the understanding the most important kind of stakeholders on that committee, those buyer personas, is incredibly important for your lead gen, because we need to make sure that we show up as teachers, trusted advisors, consultants, and subject matter experts. And the way to do that is to make sure that our lead generation content, our lead generation events, are 100% focused on what's top of mind for them. Not what you would like to be top of mind for them when they get the decisions when they get to the end of the journey, when they get to the decision stage, but what's actually top of mind for them in their own words. In their own words is incredibly important. I can't tell you how many people I have seen completely sabotage their landing page headlines and the titles of their ebooks and their webinars because they make assumptions that Bob and Sally, who've been in this industry for a long time on your sales team, who've been with your company for 20 years, has all the answers. Well, Bob and Sally may have a lot of the answers, but I would tell you that Bob and Sally on your sales team, 20% of the input, take the other 80% of the input from talking with actual people external to your company and making sure that you get the exact words they're using, because that's like night and day between attracting the right people and not. And even when you do attract the right people, your messaging resonating with them versus falling completely flat. But if your company does a lot with like search engine optimization, search engine marketing, Google ads, stuff like that, if you're not doing thorough buyer persona research, there's a really good chance that you're focusing on areas that are only marginally important and largely ignoring areas that could be incredibly impactful that most of your competitors have completely overlooked. And kind of the first cousins with all of that is hashtags and topics. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about blogs or email or social posts or videos or webinars or podcasting, getting the messaging right in their own words is what matters most. And providing value to them about what's top of mind to them. That's the key to getting the lead generation right. And then making sure that you have lead generation offers throughout the full buyer's journey, and awareness when they have a goal or a challenge they're trying to figure out, and the consideration in the middle of the buyer's journey, in the middle of the sales cycle, when they're starting to weigh different approaches, compare different options that are in front of them, and the decision stage. Most of you, if you're getting at least a passing grade in lead generation, you probably have lead generation offers on your website for the decision stage. How good they are, how effective they are, how persona specific they are, how relevant they are to the journey is up for debate. But if you're going to get a passing grade on any of this, most companies in and around data centers, critical facilities, digital infrastructure, usually have lead generation for decision stage. It's usually the awareness and the consideration where most companies are dropping the ball and segmenting so you have unique offers for your most important buyer personas at those awareness and consideration, and ultimately at the decision stage as well. So when it comes to finding the right leads and looking to generate Data center leads start by having extreme empathy for who they are and what they care about, recognizing that it's now a self-propelled buyer's journey. They are in the driver's seat. We need to meet them where they actually are. We need to make sure that we have a reason for them to spend as many of those 28 touch points as possible with our team. Because when we only show up in one or two or three of those touch points, we leave an enormous vulnerability to our company, to our pipeline, to our sales team for competitors that are actually living in the 2020s, not in the 2010s, and that get that we now have a much more self-propelled buyer's journey. So that's the key to being able to get your lead generation strategy right, finding the right leads and generating higher quality leads. Okay, next question. How do we get through to larger customers? How do we connect with the right people at these larger customers? And how do we reach and connect with decision makers? That's a fantastic question. So, the key thing when it comes to larger companies, when it comes to decision makers, when it comes to getting through to the right people, is recognizing that different people on the decision committee care about different things. And depending on the nature of what you do in the data center ecosystem, what your business model is, you'll have value propositions that are appealing to different kinds of people for different kinds of reasons. This is something in larger companies that product management teams, chief product officers, CPOs, product managers spend a ton of time on, is meeting with clients and potential clients and understanding what's going on in their world. So, and that influence has a dramatic influence on product marketing, which is one of the most important mainstays of basic website content. So at the end of the day, when it comes to reaching the right decision makers, getting through to larger customers, targeting the right people, is we need to understand that one, your prospects and clients are more than likely the not the exception to the rule. In other words, they're part of the majority of individuals in this ecosystem that want to be in the driver's seat when it comes to researching and comparing their different options. How do we know that? Because in most cases, the nature of your business is that you're dealing with internal champions who deal with transformation, some kind of transformation. And because of that, people that are into transformation tend to be more technical than others. They tend to be more skeptical and more cynical than others. And they tend to be relatively early adopters of personal technologies. Like, in other words, these are the same folks that likely told their friends and family about ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft 10 years ago before everyone was getting involved with that. These are a lot of the same people who told their friends and family about, hey, why are you still watching movies on DVDs? Haven't you heard of Netflix? These are so these early adopters that have these buying preferences in their personal lives on the B2C, the business to consumer side, almost always bring these preferences into their professional lives on the business to business side. So as a result, we need to show up where they want us to show up. They're asking questions all day long, anywhere from a few handfuls to a few dozen, in some cases, hundreds of times a week, hundreds of times a month. They're asking questions on search engines. They're asking questions on Copilot, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, Siri. Like they're just asking questions like crazy. So from your standpoint, if we want to be able to attract the right people and the right companies, we have to know what those questions are and exactly what the questions are in their own words. And we need to map those to who our most important buyer persona is and start there by making sure that when someone goes and asks one of those questions, because more than likely you are getting questions by email, you're getting questions by phone, you're getting questions on your lead generation forms, you're getting questions when you have face-to-face meetings and video meetings. All of these give you unique insight into what they care about. And my approach with all of this is anytime you get a question from someone important, there's a reasonably good chance that someone just like that you will never get to meet is going to Google and search and YouTube and asking the exact same question. And if you are able to provide one of the few best answers that's shown algorithmically when someone does that search, or that shows up because it's top of mind for someone else, and you provide fantastic value in your answer and your approach to all of this, you earn the attention for that person to say, wow, that's pretty helpful. What else do they have to say? Oh, there's three other videos or three other blogs that are linked to this. Oh, there's a downloadable planning guide. Well, so far, I like what I've seen. Yeah, I'll tell them who I am for what's on the other side of the landing page. Oh, they're doing a webinar on this next Thursday. For sure, I want to sign up. So that's how you educate and build trust over time, but you need to get found. And the key to getting found in these larger companies, especially, is to make sure that you understand the different kind of buyer personas that are present on those decision committees and making sure that you've done your buyer persona research and have a content and event strategy that is uniquely customized for what is top of mind for them. And depending on your company's resources, you're going to have to prioritize. If you have a huge marketing and sales enablement team and you could potentially have dozens of people working on this, you could slice and dice till the cows come home. Um, the reality is for most companies where they have limited resources, that's why I always encourage you to have a designate one as the primary and one as the secondary. Who's the most important economic stakeholder that you need to win over that's most strategic to your sales process in your business? Who's the second most? And when you have really good coverage on those, then you can move on to others. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do minimum viable on the others. And by minimum viable, having the other personas in a drop-down list on a lead generation form. Absolutely positively do that. Having a selection and list criteria, filter criteria in your CRM for the tertiary buyer personas for persona 3, 4, 5, beyond the two most important. And you could even go so far as to have website navigation choices and individual website pages for all of the personas that are relevant to that buying committee. But when push comes to shove and we're talking about doing a lot of lead generation offers and a lot of webinars and educational events and breakfast seminars and lunch and learns and live streams and Q&A sessions and having a regular webinar program that covers the full journey for each of your most important personas, yeah, by definition, you're going to need to prioritize your efforts and concentrate on where it's going to have the biggest impact. In terms of getting that to spread throughout the rest of the decision committee, in most cases, it's as simple as once someone has converted on one of your landing pages, like registered for a webinar, downloaded an ebook, signed up to subscribe to your newsletter. And most of you that are watching this that have converted on a DCSMI lead generation offer has experienced this personally. You signed up for this webinar, and a few minutes later, you get an email back that says, "Hey, John, who else should attend?" Question mark. You know, when it comes to improving the lead generation offer for your data center related business, it takes a village. Typically, stakeholders are involved in this role, that job title, and that job title. So, with that in mind, who else from your company should also register to attend this webinar? If it's important to you, I'd encourage you to hit the forward button, write a line or two about why this matters, and make sure that the rest of your team is aware of this resource as well. And you would be shocked at how effective that simple email marketing technology that you've been able to do for 20 years, how it still works. And you'll know it's working because you look down at your CRM, you look down at your webinar software, and you're like, wow, that's really cool. 5 or 6 people from the exact same company just registered within like 45 minutes of each other. Relative to the rest of the other registrations, they must be passing us around. They must be talking about us. And that's awesome. That's exactly what you want to be doing with your awareness and consideration stage lead generation offers. And that's one of the coolest benefits. It's not just about their self-service itch of being able to educate and build trust with someone 724, 365, because people search for content and information at weird times relative to your normal business hours. So it's not just about self-service. It's not just about giving it to them on their own terms because they're in the driver's seat. It's not just about natural sales cycle acceleration, but a lot of that sales cycle acceleration can happen because when you're thoughtful about this, your content and events makes your messaging portable in a relatively low risk, very low friction way for the first stakeholder that you meet from a company to be the hero by passing this around to the rest of their peers. And it's low risk on their part because it's awareness and consideration stage. They're not formally endorsing your company. All they're saying is, hey, team, I found this really cool webinar. I found this really cool research report. I found this really cool planning templates. I think it would be really helpful to our team. And you'll know it's worked not only because you see the multiple registrants and the multiple attendees from the same company. You'll know it's really worked because when they finally get to the decision stage and you go in to meet the first time with the committee, they're literally quoting you. They've used your entire methodology for how they have navigated the buyer's journey. You've been so amazingly helpful with your educational resources that you've monopolized most of those 28 touch points from complete stranger to purchase decision, and you've literally frozen out your competitors from having an active role in their research and decision-making process. That is the super cool, amazing stuff that can happen when you execute this kind of lead generation program at a world-class level.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
We have time for one more question. What can we do to improve our lead generation for closing more deals? So what does it take to improve lead generation for closing more deals? So a few moments ago, I talked about the importance of using your case studies to document your ideal client profile. And from there, you should be able to build your target account list of the companies you want to do business with. And from there, you'll go and figure out who you think your most important stakeholders are that you need to influence in those companies based on how you've been historically successful. Then you go out and do your customer insight research, get their own words, and that becomes your content and event strategy. What's really, really important with all of this is at some point in that buyer's journey, one of the most impactful ways for you to close deals faster and accelerate is to anticipate what someone is going to want next. This is the magic of marketing automation and sales automation. This is the magic of carefully planned calls to action that anticipates not only what awareness and consideration and decision looks like, but anticipates as many of those 28 steps in the buyer's journey as possible. Because when you proactively feed them that content, feed that information, you are already checking off the boxes in their mind that are 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of where they are. And again, by doing this the right way, you'll freeze out the need for them to go elsewhere to look for this information. Another really, really impactful way to close more deals with your lead generation program is not only doing webinars. I love webinars because it helps you to educate and build trust in a one-to-many fashion. And there's a lot of research on the value of people spending time with you at the distance of being able to watch on video and watch on these kinds of events. But even more so than that, webinars are an alignment tool. It's a way to get stakeholders on the same page. But there's a lot of different formats that you could potentially use for webinars. The webinar that you've attended today is what I consider an educational thought leadership kind of webinar, how-to kind of information, one-on-one kind of information. Another webinar that we do on a very regular basis is at the decision stage, where someone can learn about your products and services in a less one-on-one kind of fashion. The reason that that's important is there's likely a lot of people that are sitting in your pipeline, that are sitting in your deals board, that are really curious about what it is that your company does, but it's not thoroughly explained on your website. And you're hoping that the ones that are so interested are going to raise their hand and book time on your sales calendar. But what you don't realize is you're actually turning off a lot of people who don't want to be put through a sales process. They don't want to be put on the spot, but are still super curious about what it is that you do and may actually end up turning into really great clients. A good analogy to think about this with is if you go to a lot of conferences, there's 3 reasons that typically people go to a lot of conferences: to learn, to network with peers, and to visit the expo floor to learn what's new with vendors. And it's typically going back 25 years, it's always been those 3 priorities, even in the much more digital world that we live in. The going on the expo floor and learning from vendors has always been the 3rd priority. That's part of the reason why you see great open bars and cocktail parties and giveaways and everything. And it's really expensive. That's why you see over time, it used to be a generation ago that a conference that was 8 to 5 for 3 days, that the expo floor was open all of the hours that the conference was open. Now we've seen they've cut back on that over time to make it more exclusive and to kind of rein in the costs. So you're on the expo floor, and one of the most common things that you see, especially when it comes to SaaS and other kinds of software, but it's pretty popular as well, even with physical kinds of things that you're doing a demo with, like liquid immersion cooling or something like that, is you'll go by a booth and you'll see someone standing by giving a demo that has a lavalier mic or a headset mic on or something like that, and there'll be a handful of people that are closely clustered by that person, and they're taking in the demo, and it's a little more interactive because they're right there with the person giving the demo. And then you'll typically see at the outer edge of the carpeting in the booth, 20, 30 feet back, a couple of people that are watching from a distance. Why are they watching from a distance? Because they're curious as well, but they don't want a badge scan. They don't want to be put on the spot. They don't want to be put on your sales process. And that could still be an amazing lead and an amazing sales opportunity, but you need to be respectful that they have a different way of navigating the research and decision-making process. And you'll know that that person is highly relevant because 2 minutes into the demo, they pulled out the phone and they Slack their boss, who's 10 booths away. Hey, John. Hey, Sue. You got to check out booth 12. Come on over. You got to see this. You want to talk about reaching the full committee in sales cycle acceleration, and they're all standing back at the edge of the carpeting, 20 or 30 feet away from where the handful of people are closely clustered with the product manager or CEO or whoever's doing that particular demo. So what you have just seen in the offline conference world also exists in the webinar world. And that's the reason why a lot of people that aren't ready to book time on your sales calendar or book a demo or book a needs assessment would gladly attend a decision stage information kind of webinar that you hold on a regular basis to get an overview about what it is that you actually do, have the opportunity to ask some questions, have the opportunity to bring along some of their coworkers and their boss. And I would encourage you, even if you're getting relatively low numbers of people registering, it can be a dramatic sales cycle accelerant, especially if you're all in on account-based marketing, especially if you're selling large mid-market and enterprise deals where lots of stakeholders are involved. So that's the second kind of webinar that can be really impactful in closing more deals. A third kind of webinar that's very underutilized internally, but is used more with media companies, is the panel webinar, the webinar panel. And this is very similar to the kind of panel that you might moderate at a physical conference. The difference, however, with this kind of panel is that it's virtual. It's held on webinar software or live stream software, but there's still a moderator, there's still a topic, there's a handful of questions, a couple of handfuls of questions that are going to be addressed, and there's anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 different panelists. And when you put this together, those panelists can be a mix of your existing clients, and it could be other people that are similar to your clients that you'd like to be future clients, maybe at some point in the future. But that's a distant ask. All you're really doing is you invited them to participate on the panel because they have a lot of expertise around this topic, and you know they love to share that expertise generously. How do you know they normally love to share that expertise generally? Because they speak on other people's panels, because they speak at webinars, they speak at conferences, they're often interviewed on podcasts, they guest blog in industry trade publications. They have a strong personal professional brand. So those panel webinars can also be really impactful in accelerating sales for a couple of different reasons. One is when you have a mix of your existing clients and non-clients together, by virtue of having that rehearsal, you're introducing people to each other. And by being a super connector, that alone does wonderful things. The time that they spend in the virtual green room 10, 20, 30 minutes before the day of the webinar together is also magical because you're building a bond and you're introducing them together and you brought them together. And again, that's magical. What I've seen even among Fortune 1000 kinds of companies, enterprise companies, where the panelist is not allowed to formally endorse your company, but they're allowed to participate in thought leadership, is you will almost certainly, you don't need to ask them, tell the audience how wonderful we are. No, it will come up organically in the course of the best practices and the questions from the audience and the conversations back and forth and the exchanges among the different panelists that are there, it will come up organically. So you'll get your soundbite all along. So, that's a form of light social proof that can be used to complement your more concrete social proof in the form of your case study PDFs, your case study videos, your case study. And a lot of what oftentimes some of these panel interview kind of webinars are, as well as they are in some cases case studies. But I'd encourage you to use these throughout the full buyer's journey, especially in the consideration stage, where you take something that might ordinarily just have been a how-to kind of downloadable content, or a how-to kind of webinar content, or a breakfast seminar or lunch and learn or something like that. Get 3, 4, 5 people together from the industry. Take your CEO, your head of product, your head of sales, whoever is the most appropriate person to moderate. And remember, that person doesn't need to be that technical. So it's a great way to get people from your client-facing team involved in a moderator role. Think of that person more like Anderson Cooper on CNN, or a journalist on CNBC or BBC or something like that, or Bloomberg. And they're just really interviewing. They're introducing each of the panelists. They're asking questions. They're comparing and contrasting the answers. And ideally, you want people on the panel who don't 100% agree with each other. That makes it more interesting to have differing dissenting viewpoints on the topics at hand. So how-to webinars, group demo webinars, panel webinars, all can be really, really powerful accelerants, lead generation and sales cycle accelerants for most companies, most business models throughout the data center ecosystem, regardless of whether you're from an operator, a technology or facilities company, or a construction or real estate company, or even outsourced sales and marketing. So glad that you were able to join us for today's webinar, giving you a window into how you can improve the quality and quantity of the leads that come into the top, middle, and bottom of your funnel to help you grow your business, improve brand awareness, enter and penetrate new markets, differentiate yourself, and most of all, help your client-facing team show up as the definitive go-to experts in your space that can dramatically impact your deals board, your pipeline, and revenue growth in the coming weeks, months, and years. Again, I'm so glad that you were able to join us today for our webinar on data center lead generation. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. I wish you great success in improving your lead generation program. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connect invite. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. And I wish you great success in growing your business, improving your impact within the data center industry, and let us know how we can help. Take care now. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.